Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Surely You Can't Be Serious podcast, discussing and debating the iconic and the forgotten of 80s and 90s pop culture, with your co-hosts, James D. Graves and Jason Colligan.
If I go crazy, then will you still call me Superman?
Hey guys, we're back for part 2 of the Superman 1 and 2 versus Man of Steel debate. Once again, John Reed from the 30-something movie podcast is joining us. Hey, John.
Hey guys, I'm really excited. Thank you so much for having me back here. I'm ready to throw down like that Muhammad Ali Superman thing. I'm ready to throw down, fight this out. You know, may the best Superman win.
All right. I know that in Man of Steel there is no Lex Luthor, but I think we should talk about Gene Hackman for just a second.
Gene Hackman is maybe, next to Christopher Reeve, my favorite part of the Superman 1 and 2 series. He is not the mustache-twirling villain at all. Anything that you get from him that's evil is just dialogue that he's speaking. In all other respects, he seems kind of like a funny guy and easy to get along with, other than he's so full of himself.
When he was hired, he had a mustache. This is like mustache Gene Hackman.
Yeah, the original posters had a picture of Marlon Brando and Gene Hackman had a full-on mustache.
That's crazy. And he didn't want to shave. He didn't want to shave his mustache, number one. Didn't want to shave his head either.
Right.
But Dick Donner called him. He said, all right, listen, dude, if you'll shave your mustache, I'll shave my mustache. So Hackman's like, all right. Well, Dick Donner didn't have a mustache.
Not only that, when he said, "I'll shave my mustache if you shave yours," he actually had a fake mustache on.
Yeah.
And then after Gene Hackman shaved his, he's like, "All right." He's like, "Okay, cool," and peeled it off. That's awesome. The story of why Gene Hackman didn't come back for the sequel.
I think it's funny that Lex Luthor is supposed to have all these hair pieces, but I mean, anybody you know who wears a toupee that has a bald spot in it? So anytime you see Hackman, it's bald. It's a bald cap. But I love Gene Hackman. He's charming. He's funny. I talked to Dee the other day, and I'm like, when he first meets Superman and kind of lures him to his lair by making that vague threat about toxin gas or whatever, he doesn't have a plan to commit any kind of crime, and yet he has instant credibility, and Superman shows up and not kicks in his door. I'm like, that happens every day on Twitter.
In addition to Lex Luthor, we didn't have Otis, who was played by Ned Beatty, who was fantastic.
Mr. Luthor. Mr. Luthor.
Just an aside real quick, the police officers in Superman 1 not only know who Lex Luthor is, but know who his goons are, because they see Otis and decide to start following him. That scene when the guy gets pushed in front of the train was traumatic for me as a kid. I remember that.
Yeah. But
his partner, the other guy, I guess he must have done pretty well, because he ends up being the police chief for Riggs and Murdoch.
Know what that sign says, Riggs? Yeah, but I don't give a... You don't have Miss Tessmacher in Man of Steel either.
No, you don't. Valerie Perrine. Oh, my word.
Her cleavage caused the entire U.S. military to fall apart at the end of Superman 1.
Right. I mean, the I Dream of Jeannie guy had somehow transferred over to the Army branch and was high enough in command to be solely responsible
She
for that.
literally lays down, shows her boobs, and he assumes control of nuclear weapon.
I can remember he's 10 years old right now. And this has been 5 years ago. So he was been 4 or 5 years old. And I had Superman on a tablet of some kind, and he was sitting with me, and we're watching Superman for the first time. And it gets to that scene where she's in the green bathing suit, and she's laying down, and, you know, her chest is just in her arms. And my 4 to 5 year old son pushes pause on the tablet, stops going, and goes, "Dad, when I grow up and get married, I'm going to marry a girl like her."
All right, Jor-El?
Okay, so Jor-El, we've got Marlon Brando, who we've talked about, and Russell Crowe from Man of Steel. Marlon Brando was paid and there's some rough estimation on the figures here, but somewhere between $3.5 and $3.7 million for his performance in this, which is less than 20 minutes long, and then got an absurd percentage on the back end of like 11 and 3/4.
Absurd percentage.
And still sued to get more money. And then before they started shooting, he called and tried to convince Dick Donner that instead of having him appear on screen, that they could do a talking suitcase or a bagel of some kind, because nobody knows what Kryptonians really look like. So why not just use his voice? It's funny to listen to an interview with him about the amount of money that he was paid. People pay what they deem something is worth, and some things are worth more than others. Cars are worth more than hula hoops. Which I listened to it, I laughed out loud just because of the idea, and then I watched the movie and I was like, oh my gosh, there's actually hula hoops in his scene.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, the hula hoops that are keeping the criminals from escaping.
In fairness to him, though, he's absolutely right, and he was the key piece to getting this done.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I mean, certainly he had the star power to demand what he got. And, Dick Donner in his interview says, I was really skeptical of the idea of paying Marlon Brando this much money. But once I started working with him, I realized, yeah, he's worth it.
Well, what about Russell Crowe? Where are we with Russell Crowe?
Okay, so I know you love Russell Crowe.
I love Russell Crowe.
We've had this talk. I didn't like him in Gladiator, but I thought he did fantastic in this. I thought he was a compelling Jor-El who was smart and active and had a plan, and he was great. He's great as a hologram.
This part was a little confusing. I always have the AI, can they hear me? Can they understand me? Are they thinking? This whole thing is a little bit confusing to me.
Mm-hmm.
But I like both the actors. I don't know. I think you could almost make a case that Man of Steel, that you didn't really need all this stuff. That you could start with Clark on The Deadliest Catch.
Well, see, now that's an interesting comparison. I've got that over here. So when I watched Man of Steel, I was like, wow, they're really spending a significant amount of time on Krypton here, right?
Yeah.
You're getting a whole lot more story than you got with Superman. I mean, they fleshed out the place. You get a better understanding of why Zod is rebelling against the people. You get a better trial scene. Jor-El has an entire storyline that goes along with why he's doing what he's doing, has time to dive into the water and get the codex to take. I mean, I was like, wow, they must have spent like a ton of time. I looked. It's 20 minutes from beginning of movie until Krypton explodes in Man of Steel. In Superman, it's 21 minutes.
Wow.
And I thought they gave you so much more detail and depth in Man of Steel about what Krypton was like and why these characters were doing what they were doing than you ever got in Superman.
Did you know that that's roughly the same amount of time that the kid who fell off the Niagara Falls, as he fell, took about 20 minutes for Superman to get his act together and go rescue that kid.
And when he, after he appears, saves Lois Lane for the first time and thinks, I think I'll shoot the rest of the night away fighting minor crime. And he confronts the cat burglar who's crawling up the windows. And that guy starts to fall. Once again, Superman's got a time to smirk, shake his head. Well, I guess I'll zoom down and get him.
All right. I do want to throw in real quick, Kevin Costner and Diane Lane as Ma and Pa Kent. I love what they did in this.
Absolutely love it. With the Superman movies, you get a very brief glimpse of Martha and Jonathan Kent. They have a great little, bit where they discover him, and you have the falling truck, which I think will live in everybody's memory forever as the little kid lifts that truck up. Oh, quick side note on that guy. The guy's name is the little kid, the little kid who's naked and then who's lifting up the truck. His name is Aaron Smolinski, and he is the only actor who has been in Superman 1, Superman 3, and Man of Steel. He was, you remember in Superman 3 where he goes into the photo booth and it has pictures of him changing from Clark Kent to Superman. He played the kid at the photo booth on that one. And then of course he's an adult now. And so he played a communications officer in Man of Steel. And
that's cool.
There's some sort of fan film that there is in development right now called Superman versus Doomsday. And if it gets made, he'll be Lex Luthor in that. He's bald now. So looks like he'd be good. It looks like Lex Luthor. But what an interesting life that guy has to have had so far. But back to Ma and Pa Kent, Jonathan and Martha Kent, you don't get much from them. I mean, especially Ma Kent, you don't get much at all. She's just kind of there as, homely.
She's
She's old, man. She's a little silver-headed old woman. You don't get much from her other than, love you, don't forget. No, never forget. But you got way different parenting in this one. Martha Kent is fan-freaking-tastic. I love her.
Yeah.
Diane Lane, she can pull off young and old very easily. I bought her being old enough to be his mom.
She's
and then
old
obviously,
and beautiful. Still.
yeah, she still can pull off being very young as well.
And Kevin Costner does a great sort of Midwestern, I kept waiting for him to ask him if he wanted to have a catch. He's great. He's Mr. Field of Dreams,
Yeah.
So,
and people had a problem with Jonathan Kent when Clark Kent says, should I just have let them die? Him saying maybe, but you've got to have that in order to establish within Clark how critical the idea of people cannot know what you can do.
I totally agree with that. I've heard the criticism, but you and I have teenagers. John, your kids are not teenagers yet, but
No, my oldest is 12.
Okay. Even if for a 12-year-old to have godlike powers at that age and the decision-making abilities, Kevin Costner is wise telling him, let's wait.
Yeah.
Let's wait until you're ready to become the greatest being on this earth.
Yeah.
When people were making such a big deal out of that, I kept thinking the same thing was, well, first of all, it's a movie. Second of all, put yourself in that person's place. You get the portrayal of Ma and Pa Kent is in the original Superman movie is very much your classic, well, it's a kindly old farm couple and they've raised this boy to be their own and they, good Midwestern United States values and everybody, it's all very pure and there's not a whole lot of complication here. And you put yourself in the character of what Jonathan Kent as a human would have been like. And I feel like, well, I can't imagine I would be any different. Like I would be a little paranoid.
Yeah.
And I would be concerned that if I let this slip, somebody's taken my son away and they're going to experiment on him and they're going to do all this other crazy stuff. And
not to mention, you have people start asking questions about how you illegally adopted a child.
Right. To me, I didn't have a problem with that. When that whole thing came out, and I remember seeing that in the trailer, and I remember having a discussion with, and it might have been Jeff, one of the other guys that's on the podcast with us sometimes. Right. We might have had a discussion about that, and he was like, well, how do you feel about that? And I was like, you know what? First of all, it's in a trailer, so it could be completely out of context. So let's actually watch the movie and see. And he's like, oh, that makes sense. And even watching the movie and that line, it's like, should I have let them die? Maybe. Like, well, okay. So watching this as an audience member watching a movie, I can sit there and have the luxury of saying, oh, Jonathan, no, bad advice. But as a person, like if I'm living in this world and if that's me, I probably would say something like that. I might regret it later on and be like, okay, I made a mistake. Never mind. We don't let anybody ever die. But in the moment when I've got a scared kid that's asking me questions, and like you said, he's got this godlike power at age 13 or whatever he was. Yeah, I'd probably be a little freaked out too.
Another detail touch, just you don't even notice it. I know this because I watched the behind the scenes. When he ultimately shows Clark the spaceship that he came to Earth in, you get these extreme close-ups of the desk behind him, and it's all his research on alien life and extraterrestrials, UFO sightings, all of this. They went to the trouble to get all of that prepared for that tiny little scene that you don't even see. It's just kind of crazy.
Yeah. Before we jump ahead, I did want to say one thing about Diane Lane's Martha Kent. Yeah. Is to me that's and I'm fine with the kindly old Martha Kent too. I mean, that's traditionally that's how she's portrayed in nearly everything else. Yeah. But this Diane Lane Martha Kent, like she stands up to Zod. Yeah. And if you're a mother who's raised this child and he eventually someday is going to become Superman, that's the Martha Kent that I would expect to see. Like someone who you've got this alien in front of you that has ridiculous power. He's, there's a couple of them other theirs too. They've thrown a truck into your house and you're still going to stand up to the guy. Yeah, like to me, that's Superman's mom.
He has powers as we do?
Certainly, but no magnificent one. He is just one. Or you are 3. Or 4 if you count him twice.
You know, in terms of the character of Non, they've introduced him into the newer comics, and he's got a much more tragic story. I think that his story in the newer comics is he was friends with Jor-El,
Yeah,
and he was a member of the Kryptonian Council, and
They lobotomized him.
he was like lobotomized. Yeah, he was lobotomized, and so every time, you know, Jor-El sees him up until the destruction of Krypton, like it breaks his heart because that was a very close friend of his. And so it's obviously got a little bit more of a backstory when you add that piece into it. One of the characters that I was hoping that we would mention, but didn't get mentioned. He's only in the original Superman for 1 or 2 seconds. The actor's name, I believe, is Bo Rucker, and he played the pimp in Superman.
That was my dad's favorite line.
Exactly. That's, and I didn't want us to go beyond the actors and the characters without mentioning the pimp, because that is possibly the best line in the movie.
Yeah.
And there have been times, and I love that my children have no idea what I'm quoting up until they see the movie, and they're like, oh, so you didn't make that up. That's where you got that from. But there are times where if my kids will come in the room, they'll be like, Dad, this is what I'm wearing to church today. Is this okay? Or Dad, this is what I've got on. Is this all right? A lot of times I'll go, say, Jim, that's a bad outfit. What? That is the best. I mean, just and seeing that as a kid, that completely blew over my head of how funny that is. But as an adult, and Christopher Reeve, his response to the whole thing, that is probably one of the most hilarious, like 3 or 4 seconds in the entire movie, because he does the whole revolving door thing, steps outside, and the pimp says his line, say, Jim, that's a bad outfit. And Superman just goes, excuse me, puts one finger up, and then flies away. I'm just like, that, you could just have played me that 4 seconds, and I would have said, you know what, Superman's the greatest movie it's ever been made. That's all I need to see.
Young Clark in Superman movies was played by Jeff East. Now, when I watched these movies, I was like, holy cow, they got a guy who sounds exactly like Christopher Reeve to play the young Christopher Reeve. I mean, he doesn't look like him that much, but his voice is identical. No wonder they picked this guy. Yeah, so I was dumb.
Chris Reeve dubbed all those lines.
Yeah, and they did it without Jeff East's knowledge. Now, Jeff East has been in a few other movies. Do you guys remember the old Tom Sawyer movie with the redheaded Tom Sawyer and Jodie Foster was Peggy Thatcher?
Yeah.
He played Huck Finn in that movie.
Really?
Jeff East did,
Really?
yeah.
Like a big fat cow with chewing on the gut, like a catfish grubbing in the bottom of the mud. We're happy as a coot and we don't give a hoot. Ain't we fine?
He was really upset when he saw the movie and saw that his lines had been dubbed over by Christopher Reeve. He didn't know, and the producers didn't tell him that was going to happen. He didn't know it was going to happen. So he was a little irritated. And then another interesting story for him, you know, he does the train race where they've got him kind of an absurd running thing, but I loved it when I was a kid.
Yeah, his gait is a little strange.
It is a little bit weird. But they do that scene where he jumps in front of the train just at the last second, and they're using a real train. And he said he almost died at some point as they were trying to film this because one of the cables didn't do one of the cranes didn't do the right thing, and he swung back around. And Richard Hackman, Gene Hackman's brother, who was the stunt guy on the scene, grabbed him before he swung back in front of the train and died.
Now, since you brought it up, that was one of the things that I really liked about how Man of Steel handled the young Clark Kent piece was, and I thought it was a fresh take on it that I just had not seen before. Watching that and thinking, you know what, the way he's dealing with these powers and these sensations that he just can't understand, it really reminded me of, you know, a lot of times when a student will get diagnosed with some kind of a learning disability or whatever it might be. And I thought, you know what, is that the route that they're going to kind of take with this? Is that, you know, what if we think of Superman or what if we think of Clark Kent as he was a child that from the outside world, he grew up with some kind of a disability? Like, that would be an interesting take that I've never seen or heard of before. And just the way that, you know, his mom, you know, he panics because he, you know, sees through his teacher, which would freak out anybody. I'm glad he didn't stop and be like, pink. That would be awkward.
Pink? If the teacher says, "Do you like pink?" That makes it.
That's a little awkward. But and then, you know, he runs and locks himself in that closet, and then his mom has to come and kind of talk him through the whole thing, and he can hear all the kids making the comments about him outside the room, and the way she's just calming him down and trying to get him kind of back out of this panic that he's in. I mean, I've seen students who actually do that. The world just overwhelms them so much that the sensory stuff that's coming in just gets to them so much that they don't know how to process it.
His life is a lonely existence. And the story of young Clark Kent in Man of Steel, I mean, really informs who he is as an adult. And even going back and watching the original Superman movies with Christopher Reeve, you get that loneliness as well. There's this scene where he's tried to get Lois to go out with him and she won't go out with him. And then he tries to say hi to the guys in the hall as he's waiting for the elevator, and it gets ignored. And then he's just kind of standing there waiting on the elevator. And there's this sense of loneliness of, this is what comes with being Superman. It's not, we all think, oh gosh, I just want to be Superman. But there's this huge isolation that comes with the job that it's tough.
I'll tell you what, though, Superman as a strange child or a lonely man is a whole lot better than Superman as a stalker that you get in Superman Returns. When he breaks into that person's house, and if you got Superman as an intruder, you got a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Now, bullying, I've got a full note on this one. Bullying is a huge part of this. And John, I feel like, and I could be totally making this up in my head, but I feel like you posted maybe an article a few months ago on kind of the notion of bullying, and that sometimes it makes kids stronger. And Chris Rock's got a comedy special out on Netflix right now where like he finds out that they have a no tolerance policy for bullying at his daughter's school. And he's like, I almost pulled her out right then. He says, bullies made me who I am. And so bullying's a huge part of the backstory of Superman in both movies. Mm-hmm. You get more of it in the original trilogy with the Smallville guy. What was that guy's name? Brad.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, what a slime ball. But then in the Man of Steel one, you imagine if you were able to hear every ugly thing that people said about you.
Right. What would that turn you into if you could hear everything in town?
Yeah.
And you heard every rumor, you heard every kid whispering about you.
That idea is what is the driving force behind the whole beginning story for Man of Steel. I mean, the whole story really for Man of Steel is this unspoken question for Clark, which is humanity worth saving? Because you get scene after scene where you've got humans being despicable, followed up by humans doing the right thing. You've got the guy saving his life on what were they doing on that boat?
It's like the Peggy Sue. Yeah. Deadliest Catch, man.
He saves his life and then he calls him a dummy. But this kind of, he's like, even though he thinks I'm an idiot, he still saved me, which then leads to him, saving all those guys on the oil rigger. You got the kids being mean to him, and then his mom comes in and is nice to him. You got Pete Ross being mean to him on the bus before Lana's nice to him, which leads to him saving Pete. Then you got the bully, picking on him while he's reading Plato. And who is it that shows up to be nice? It's Pete Ross, who he's changed. It's this constant.
You got the guy at the bar later on that throws the beer at him,
right? And the waitress who's he's like, it's not worth it, honey. And then it all culminates with Lois, who she's going to get the story. She finally figures it out, but when she realizes what's at stake, she drops it. She doesn't let him go, which then gives you those lines later on where he says, thank you. And she says, for what? And he says, for believing in me. And she said, it didn't end up meaning very much. And he says, it did for me.
Mm-hmm. She's the humanity that's worth saving.
Yeah. That's the whole question. And you talked about this in your podcast, and this was a huge deal for me when I saw Man of Steel the first time. I was kind of heavily into reading the Bible at that point. And so when I saw Man of Steel, I was like, holy smokes, there's a lot of Christ references in this movie. I was like, I learned about, that was Donner's intent, and you can see it in the Donner cut, but it's kind of, Donner says, nobody's going to put as many Christ references in as I will in a Superman movie. And Zack Snyder says, hold my beer.
Yeah.
Well, that was, my wife was surprised the first time we watched. She had never seen, it was several years ago now, but she had never seen the original Richard Donner Superman. Mm-hmm. And the first time we sat down and watched it together, she, like, partway through the movie, she goes, So is Richard Donner a Christian? Like, is he like a pastor or something? Because
Right.
there's a lot of stuff in here. Like, I mean, that's pretty much straight out of the Bible. Is like most of the stuff Jor-El is saying. I mean, it really sounds like it's right out of the Bible. And I said, no,
Yeah.
that's just how they chose to do it. But
The Father becomes the Son.
Yep.
Yeah.
And with Man of Steel, he's 33 years old.
Yep.
At the point that he's trying to decide whether to give up and save humanity or not, he goes to the church, and right behind him as he's talking to the preacher is Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. I was like, oh, okay, that is amazing, and I don't know how many other people are seeing what I'm seeing right now. But and then, of course, when he right after Jor-El says, "You can save her, you can save all of them," and he busts out of the ship and does his Nestea plunge in the Jesus on the cross. I was just like, wow.
Let me just make a comment on the suit real quick.
Yeah.
We can compare uniforms, but the original Superman movie, they wanted it to be darker, but they had to make it lighter because they were losing them in the effects, like when they're flying around at night. I liked how in Man of Steel, they always talk about Superman flying around in blue underwear. In
Red
Man of
underwear.
Steel, well, red underwear
Right. Outside
briefs,
of the
right?
fence, yeah, right.
But Jor-El actually takes off his battle armor, and he's wearing that blue suit underneath, and so it actually is an undergarment.
Yeah.
Which I think is really cool.
Turns out it is underwear.
I do like how it looked like a super small, like chainmail, like it was protective.
Yeah.
I don't mean to steer us off course on the
I think
uniform, but
there's a great interview out there between Christopher Nolan, who was the producer on Man of Steel, and Dick Donner. And he told Dick Donner, this is interesting story number one. Christopher Nolan, of course, grew up in England. He got to go and see the set for Superman 1 when he was like 6 years old. And then when he pitched his idea to Warner Brothers, he said, I want to do for Batman what Dick Donner did for Superman back in 78 when he was pitching his Dark Knight. But they note in that interview, everything's done on green screen now, but back when they were doing Superman, it was blue screen. Right? Well, Superman's in a blue suit. How do you make him not invisible? That was tough. Like, they had to go through several different colors to finally find one that was a blue that you could see that looked right, but was not one that was going to make Superman invisible.
Superman 1 and 2, you got to go back to the 70s and these are all practical effects. So projection and wires and stuff like that. You know that the cape in Man of Steel is 100% CGI.
I expect better manners from my guests, Zod.
related to the Superman suit itself, I was just a little disappointed in Man of Steel that he didn't tear that emblem off and turn it into a cellophane S that he could throw at people. I mean, I was so looking forward to that, but it just never happened.
The cellophane S. The cellophane S.
Oh my god.
Okay, so let's get into that because a lot of people like to point out that this, even the Family Guy had a little thing about this, how it was just a minor inconvenience to none. It doesn't really do anything, and it wasn't based in any comic book. It's just kind of a weird thing, the cellophane S. But that's not the biggest problem from the Superman 1 and 2 movies. Can we get into the reversal and the super kiss? I'm ready to dive into this.
Let's go for it, yeah.
Okay.
Let's go.
So I love Superman 1 and 2. I am going to defend Superman 1 and 2, but it has problems. So let's talk about number one, the ending to Superman 1, which was originally supposed to be the ending for Superman 2, the time reversal. So they were filming this movie. They're filming two movies at the same time when they realized, man, we're running out of money. We're not sure we're going to have enough money to finish Superman 2, so let's finish Superman 1. But they had this ending that they liked, and so they took the ending that was supposed to end at Superman 2 and put it at the end of Superman 1. He flies backwards around the Earth stops spinning and actually starts spinning backwards, which causes time to reverse. People at the equator are spinning at approximately 2,000 miles per hour. And if the Earth suddenly stopped spinning, those people would continue to move at 2,000 miles an hour. So the reversing the Earth on its axis would kill tons of people and destroy the Earth. It's not going to reverse time. But
I'm okay with it.
when I was a kid,
I was okay
like,
with it.
oh, man, wow.
Now, I can't figure out how he manages to go in a circle around the Earth about 100 times in a few seconds, but he can't get from one side of the United States to the other in the 10 minutes that he's got to
Yeah.
get both of the missiles.
I saw one of those how it should have ended things, right?
Yeah, you
And,
you can't catch both of those. Oh wait,
You
these two.
weren't that fast.
These two missiles, yeah.
Now there was something that I read a while ago, and it actually made me, because this scene always bothered me too, like the whole time reversal stuff, and we'll get into the time reversal piece of it too, because I think that's still a problematic way to try to solve your problems. But this scene where he flies, and I too have always kind of assumed, well, wow, he flew fast enough that it turned the Earth backwards and it reversed the rotation of the Earth. And then I read something, and the person said, well, what if he's not actually exerting any kind of force on the Earth? What if we're just seeing him fly so fast that he's flying backward in time, and we're seeing the Earth turn backwards because that's time turning backwards, not that he's actually turning the Earth backwards? And I'm like, oh, well, okay. I mean, I guess I'm feel a little bit better about that then, if we're just watching the Earth rotate backwards because he's traveling back in time, as opposed to he's actually forcing the Earth to turn backwards. I'm like, all right, well, I clearly didn't get that as a kid. Like as a kid, I was like, wow, he can turn the Earth backwards. That's pretty weird. But I also know that you've got all kinds of paradoxes when you deal with time travel. And so I'm looking at that. I'm like, okay, now as an adult, as a kid, I was just like, all right, he turned back time. He saved Lois. Everything's all good. But then I'm also thinking about it now as an adult. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. If he turned back time, then did he catch the missiles? And where is he when wait a minute now. Okay, so where is current Superman when he's turning back the time? Did he catch the missiles? And how could he still get back to where Lois was? And how is she okay now? Because if he turned back time, the missiles would still have hit because he didn't go stop the missiles earlier as an adult. If somebody were to do that now in a movie, I'd be like, all right, well, that's kind of a cheap way to undo everything.
It's cheap, but I don't think it's as cheap as the amnesia kiss.
Oh, no, that's even
Okay, let's talk about the super
Far
kiss.
worse.
Okay, the super kiss is an underrated superpower. All right, I am telling you, if there
So underrated, it's non-existent.
men in this world, I know every man alive would like the power to fly and have X-ray vision.
I want to start answering that question that way now. Hey, if you could have any superpower, what would it be? Amnesia kiss. That's what I'm thinking.
If you could have a relationship and then be able to super kiss your way out of that relationship, that's a pretty good superpower.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I told Dee this yesterday. At the end of the movie Weird Science, when Lisa causes Gary's dad to forget that she was over there because she zapped him a little bit too hard. What if you kissed a girl a little bit too hard? What if he kissed Lois too hard and now she has no recollection of who Clark is? But that's not even the biggest problem with those movies.
Very delicate thing. When they get into the Fortress of Solitude and all of a sudden there's 18 different new powers that we've never seen before, including stuff coming out of your finger.
What's the deal with the white beams? I mean,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And how does he push the rays to the outside that turn you into mortal men? How does that happen? I'm just going to push real hard on the glass here and everything will go out and I'll be safe inside. Okay, so Superman 2 is easy to pick on.
yes.
It's very easy to pick on. There's a lot of Lester things that you can just go, well, that was really dumb.
It's also the most fun.
Right.
It is.
Well, but I'm going to go ahead and pick on Superman 1 at this point. I enjoy the camp. I enjoy the humor. But there are some things in Superman 1 that I was just like, what just happened just now? When Lex Luthor, in a matter of about a minute and 30 seconds, not only figures out what kryptonite can do, but where to get it by going around on his 4-shelf bookshelf.
Mm-hmm.
It's absurd. He's like, oh, well, he said he's from another galaxy. Well, I think he said that.
I have a feeling that meteorite is going to cripple him.
Which means that a piece of his planet had to have hit Earth.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's not what
No, it
that
doesn't.
means.
It's a really big universe.
And I'm going to go ahead and scoot on over here, pull out a book. Here's a guy with a meteorite. Here's a picture. I'll tear it out. You can look at it. We know where he is. And how do we know that this is from Krypton?
We don't.
We don't.
I'm going to poke the bear and then test my theory.
Oh my gosh. And then somehow he makes it out there, picks up because he steals it from a museum. I know that news report's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Steals it from the museum, then manages to make it back in time to set all the stuff up with the missiles, and then manages to make it out to the area where the land deals are going on. It's just I'm just like, oh, guys.
Well, but I mean, he's the greatest criminal mind of our age.
Me, Lex Luthor.
How about the fact that he says, where does he go, Miss Tessbacher? North, right?
North.
So he wanders around vaguely until he finds the Fortress of Solitude.
Yeah.
And then when he gets there, Superman spent at least, 12 years from the time he was 18 till the time he was about 30, learning about Kryptonian history.
It's a nice way to dodge Vietnam, by the way.
I'm just going to hang out in the Fortress of Solitude, the ice disco.
Yeah.
But Lex Luthor shows up in about 5 minutes. He's got it all figured out.
Right. Yeah.
The crystals and all that stuff.
Again, greatest criminal mind of our age. I think you guys are really struggling with something you don't need to struggle with. He's the greatest criminal mind of our age. That's all you need to know. It's like the I don't know if you've seen lately. I've seen people put up these GIF or this image on Twitter. The meme for Batman being the greatest detective.
Yeah,
and it's from the episode of when he was trying to figure out the identity of the Joker. And he's got a picture of this like gangster that the face kind of resembles the Joker, and he's in like a picture with like 12 other people. And Batman in the animated series, he takes this red marker and he just draws a red smiley face. And he's like, "That's the Joker." I'm like, "Really? That the great Dark Knight detective? All it took was a red Sharpie for you to figure out who the Joker was."
But you know what? That the super kiss is not the biggest problem. The turning the time back is not the biggest problem. Wandering around and finding the Fortress of Solitude is not the biggest problem. The biggest problem for me is when Clark trips over the bear head and falls into the fire and reveals himself to be Superman. First of all, Superman would kick that bear through the wall. I mean, the fact that he would trip is ludicrous. And then, I mean, he fights Lois, and then he reaches in and grabs the glasses real quick. And, as soon as she confronts him, "Well, you are Superman." He's just like, "Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, I am."
Sorry about almost letting you drown earlier. I'll just go ahead and fess up now that your life's not in danger at all.
The reveal is ludicrous. But the Donner reveal was just as bad. She pulls a gun on him. I'm like, I feel bad for this guy. She fires at him, which he then takes his glasses off. "Hey, I'm Superman."
And he's like, "That was a really dangerous, risky game for you to play."
And she's like, "With blanks, I have blanks."
Right. Which then you go, okay, so Superman doesn't feel bullets at all when he gets shot. Like, there's no feeling whatsoever. There's got to be at least a tickle.
See, if that was you, though, and somebody pulled a gun on you and fired an actual gun you're trying to seduce, you'd have to change your shorts. The seduction would be over at that point. The reveal is my biggest problem with these two movies.
Okay, we're moving into judgment stage here. So we've talked about the problems with Superman 1 and Superman 2. Let's talk about problems with Man of Steel.
Okay.
Jason, you have the floor.
Okay. My biggest problem is when he executes Zod, the killing of Zod. And I know that they try to make the case compelling that he's going to X-ray vision these innocent civilians, and that's kind of Clark's last chance. I mean, that's what he has to do. But for me, when I saw this movie in theaters, I thought, man, I don't know if I want Superman killing. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, he killed Zod in Superman 2 as well. And just to draw the distinction here, at least he struggled with the decision a little bit in Man of Steel. And when it happened, he cried out in agony like, "Oh no, I've just killed the last Kryptonian member of our race."
Krypton. I like how you say it like Marlon Brando does.
Yeah, like Marlon Brando, Krypton. He didn't smile and wink at him before he threw him into the chasm.
I mean, it was in Superman 2, as he's coming up and he's acting like he doesn't have his powers and he kneels down, he has got the biggest frown I've ever seen in my life. Like, I've got to hide what's about to happen because I'm just going to nail Zod, so I'm going to look super, super sad. And then he doesn't just kill him, he crushes his fan and then throws him screaming in pain down a bottomless pit. Of the two deaths, I think the quick neck snap is what I would choose.
So that was, when Man of Steel came out, I'm the person in my circle of friends that whenever a Star Wars movie comes out, whenever a Superman movie comes out, people always go to me first, like, "What'd you think?"
Right.
We need to know what you thought, because if you loved it, then that probably means it's pretty good, and you know all this stuff. And so I was like the first person people would get into debates with. And they were like, "Oh man, he let the whole city get trashed, and Superman would never do that," and and all that stuff. He's like, "Well, Superman snapped his neck. He'd never, Superman would never do that." I'm like, "Have you read a Superman story. Like there's times all the time where somebody dies or something happens like that. And the exact same thing. When that came up and people are like, well, Superman would never snap his neck like that. I said, well, have you watched Superman 2? Because not only does he, I mean, these people are powerless. Like he has reversed this process. So these are, it's not like he's fighting a supervillain in Superman 2. He's now fighting Disco Zod and Ursa and Non. And he's just letting them die. And I'm like, that to me, now that I think about that as an adult, as a kid, I was like, yeah, you go, Superman, you crush his hand, you do all that stuff. You know, and wrong again, Zod. And as a kid, I was like, this is awesome. I love this. He's finally getting back at these people. And I look at that now and I go, that's really sadistic. Yeah. Like he could have, if the guy can go catch a missile, you know, if he can fly halfway across the United States and catch a missile and then possibly fly back and get the second one and be like, hey, I got both of them, then I have a feeling that Superman could probably zip the, 15 feet to go, like, you know, catch Non before he falls into the chasm. He could then zip the 15 feet to go catch Ursa. He could even let Lois, you know, do her thing and punch Ursa.
Right.
I'm fine with that. But then he could go catch her so she doesn't die. And he doesn't have to throw Zod into the thing and kill him. He's killing humans. So that to me now as an adult and kind of comparing those situations, that's way more problematic for me when I actually think about how those villains were done away with in that movie. And knowing the history of the comics, actually killing Zod in the comics was something that defined Superman for many, many, many years. There were moments in the Superman comics for the next, after 2 to 3 decades after the mid-'80s, where Superman would always bring that up. He's like, well, the reason I don't kill is because I did kill Zod. I executed Zod and his generals, and it tore me up, and it made me value life once I realized what I had done, and there's always got to be a better way. So that to me was, that kind of moment is what makes him, you know, it's what's building that character. It's what makes him the Superman that he will later become. And when that happened in Man of Steel, I didn't have a problem with it because I looked at that as, you've got Superman who's been, he's been raised on Earth. He's a civilian. He's been raised on Earth, and he's fighting someone that has the exact same powers he does with military training, you know, probably, you know, self-defense, military type training. And so he's not going to have the same tactical knowledge, the same kind of fighting skill, you know, that. And he's doing what he can. Like, this is still a very young he's only been Superman for a day, maybe a couple of days.
Right.
And so I'm looking at that and I'm going, well, putting myself in that shoes. Well, what would I do in that situation? If I saw a family about to get killed, this guy who has basically said, you've wiped out all the rest of my people. I have nothing left. I will kill every person on this earth to get back at you. So he said, I'm going to murder everyone. I'm just letting you know, I'm going to murder everyone. And I look at that and I go, put in that situation, I would never kill anyone. Me personally, I'm like, no, I would never kill anyone. But if you put me in that situation, would I struggle with it? And if push came to shove, would I snap the guy's neck to save a group of other people, a family, and possibly the rest of the earth? Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
So that scene, it doesn't bother me. And what bothers me more, and this is not necessarily the scope of our discussion, but what bothers me more is that we didn't get a Man of Steel 2 to be able to explore that further. But no, that scene doesn't bother me because I compare that now with Superman 2, and I think, well, actually that seems more callous and a little bit more sociopathic than, you know, the events of Man of Steel.
You know, we were talking about this. This has been a few weeks ago. It had never even occurred to me that Superman killed all 3 of those villains in Superman 2.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because I'm still looking at it through a child's eyes. Apparently, there's rumors of some cut out there that shows that these criminals were arrested and taken to jail.
Yeah, I think that didn't you did some research on that? Like there was,
I saw it where he arrested Lex Luthor.
Right, the Arctic police come in and arrest Lex Luthor.
The Arctic police
who happen to also get access to the Fortress of Solitude.
I think Lois called 911 for the Fortress of Solitude.
in the 90s.
There's a super phone. They have a little. It's under a glass jar. It's like what Batman used to have. You pick up the glass jar. It's like a Kryptonian crystal jar. You pick it up. Right. You make the phone.
That's
call.
One of the things that he did in the molecule chambers. We call 911.
Right.
But apparently the rumor that the 3 Kryptonian villains get arrested and put in human jail is just that. It's just a rumor.
Yeah, okay. But I will say this, when we talked about this, so, and I'm moving in towards my final judgment here, but after rewatching these, Man of Steel is better than I remember it being initially.
Mm-hmm.
Superman 2 is worse than I remember it being originally. But at the time, Superman 2 did a great job of manipulating my feelings as a little boy.
Yeah.
And I was telling Dee that when he goes into the molecule chamber and there's red on the outside rather than the inside, I didn't catch that when I saw it in the theater. And so when he starts crushing his hand, I'm like, wait, what? And then I'm like, yes. So that scene charged me up. When Lois Lane punches out Ursa, I got fired up about that. I was so excited.
We didn't touch on this, but this is a major factor in what's going on in those scenes and how you feel emotionally at the time of the death of Zod and his henchmen. With Superman, you've got John Williams' score, which, I mean, arguably the best superhero score in all of history, right?
Yeah.
And I will tell you that, you know, I heard about Dick Donner coming in and hearing this for the first time, and he said something that gave me vindication, because I will sing Superman to my kids whenever we're putting it on in the car. Mm-hmm. And I go, da, 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 mm-hmm. Superman. I mean, I love it. And, but apparently that was exactly Dick Donner's reaction when he heard Williams' theme for Superman was, you are saying it with the music, and it's fantastic.
Yeah.
When he crushes his hand, you get that score coming in with da 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 da, and you're like, yes, it's a victory. We've got the victory theme. But when he's having to decide to kill Zod, it's agonizing. You've got Zimmer's intense, emotional, non-thematic music just pulling at you, and it totally changes your perspective to where you think, oh gosh, this is horrible. This is horrible. Superman's killing somebody. Well, that's what they want you to think, because it is horrible. It's just that in Superman, they made it funny and justified.
And John, I thought for a second that Dee was going to sing, "Can you read my mind?"
Yes. Well, I definitely
the most awkward moment.
The horrible soliloquy poem reading that Margot Kidder did.
Yeah, in terms of the music, I mean, since we're talking music, I have a really hard time with this one. As I was doing my back and forth of, all right, well, okay, you get John Williams, Hans Zimmer, let's go back and forth with it, and then who did they replace John Williams with for 2? Ken Thorne, I think was his name. Yeah, and you know, I spent the last few days. I had my Spotify playlist up, and I put all the soundtracks together, and I was like, I'm just going to listen to this back and forth, and you know what? The John Williams, you can't argue with that. It's iconic. It is Superman. I mean, that's been for ever since 1978. Hans Zimmer's score, nobody's going to do that. When my son was really, really little, still in his car seat, I'd put on like the Planet Krypton theme from Superman.
Yes.
And when it would get to the point where it just crescendoed, he'd like, dun, dun, I'm not even gonna do it right, but he'd like throw both arms up in the air back in his car seat. And I was like, okay, I have raised you well. I really could just stop now, because you know this has been successful. But you know, you've got that. You've got the John Williams. You know, had that very kind of synthesizer, creepy. You know, almost like the Kryptonian Zod theme that got continued on through Superman 2. I will say, though, that overall, as an entire movie, as an entire film, I think that the Hans Zimmer score did a little bit better job for me of filling in the atmosphere of that movie. Like if I look at the original Superman and Superman 2 score, I can probably, in my mind, pick out, oh yeah, there's like 3 pieces of music that I can remember.
Right.
And that's if I ignore the "Can you read my mind" part, which I'm constantly trying to do. I wish there was some kind of a super kiss that could get that one out of my mind. But then I think about the Hans Zimmer score, and I'm like, okay, is there anything in there that's as memorable as the Planet Krypton theme, as the John Williams Superman theme? No. But in the movie as a whole, overall, that fills that movie so much better than the John Williams score does.
They did some neat things with Hans Zimmer's score musically. Like he Superman being as American as he is, he wanted to take something that was a uniquely American instrument, which is the pedal steel guitar, which you typically hear in like bluegrass and country music, but he changed it in such a way that it becomes the string section. So you've got a really unique sound to those strings that you can recognize from the Man of Steel score. And then on those intense scenes, it's all drums. That boom, 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 boom. And for that one, we get like 9 different drummers.
It's like 12 of the world's greatest drummers.
Yeah,
including Sheila E. and Jason Bonham.
And so he puts them in a circle, puts the microphone in the middle of the circle, and to give the effect of being surrounded by these intense primal drums.
All right, so final judgment. I'm with Superman 1 and 2 over Man of Steel.
Yeah. I got to say that after watching these movies again, I had the same reaction you did. I liked Man of Steel better than I did at the beginning, and I loved it at the beginning. I got to say, Man of Steel is a better movie. Its plot structure is better. The character development is better. The setting for Smallville, the setting for Krypton, the struggle that Clark has are all better. And so, as much as it pains me, as much of a fan of the original movies as I am and was, Man of Steel is a better movie. Now, I'll say this, Superman will always be Christopher Reeve to me. If you say Superman, that's the first thing that I want to think of. And he brought something to the character that Henry Cavill didn't. Henry Cavill did a great job, and especially the moment that he's standing watching his father about to die. That is an emotionally moving moment for me and a fantastic performance. I had the same feeling I felt whenever Superman, Christopher Reeve, finds Lois dead and cries out. Both of those were emotionally impactful performances.
Right.
But whereas Christopher Reeve will always be Superman in my mind, I've got to say Man of Steel's a better movie. John?
Yeah, all right.
Moment of truth.
I almost wanted to pull an Eric Cartman. Like, I hate you guys so much. Jason, you referenced, or one of you guys referenced early on that in my episodes I did where I talked about like the history of Superman and I did my ranking of it. I think I said that Superman 1 was number 1 for me, Man of Steel was number 2, and Superman 2 was number 3. And so, having rewatched these movies, having talked it out with you guys here, having taken copious notes, and scared my family because they thought I was turning into a serial killer with like all these composition notebooks full of tiny handwriting. I think I've come out the other side of this with James. I think I'm very much on the same page you are, that nothing will ever replace Superman 1 and 2 for me. Far and above, Christopher Reeve I always look at him and think Superman. Nothing can ever replace the times that I had, watching these movies with my dad, with my family, and just the memories that are attached with those. I love Superman 1. I love Superman 2. But that being said, some of the things that we've said here too, I think that Man of Steel, and I know that this is an unpopular opinion because a lot of people don't like Man of Steel. Man of Steel has always been my favorite of the more recent DC movies, even including, I think, the Batman movies, the Christopher Nolan Batman movies. Man of Steel is my favorite. I guess you wouldn't even call those DCEU because we weren't there yet, but it's my favorite DC movie of the last, probably couple of decades. And I think for some of the very similar reasons that it's just, I get more backstory. I get more emotional involvement in the character of Clark and the character of Superman, the character of Lois, even the character of Zod. I have more of a emotional, visceral reaction to what's going on in this movie. I care more about these characters. Not that I didn't care about them when I was a kid watching the other ones, but it was very much... Sometimes it's the difference between, sometimes people that are like Marvel fans and DC fans will make this distinction. Marvel will say, well, our stuff is grounded in reality. We have our characters in Boston and New York and San Diego, whereas you guys made up towns like Gotham and Metropolis. And like our characters, we have a scientific reason why they have powers. And so there's a difference between like your grounded explanation for superheroes and more of like your godlike legends. And I think that Superman and Superman 2 fall into that very comic book centric, godlike legend of Superman. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I absolutely love that about those movies. But I think for someone who wants to dig into the story and understand why these characters are doing what they're doing, why does he become the Superman that we all know and love? Why does he fall in love with Lois? Who are the parents that raised him to think this way and to be this way? Who's the villain that just, almost perfectly matches with what he's struggling with at the time in this movie? And how he has to, like we said, he is agonized when he kills Zod at the end, because all he's ever wanted is to belong. All he's ever wanted is to fit in. He's finally found his people, and he has had to kill the last of his, other than himself, he's had to kill the last of his people. So he's had to completely destroy the one thing that he has wanted his entire life, is just to fit in. And so I think for those reasons, I have to go Man of Steel in this case, but it's really a struggle to say that, because I love the other Superman movies so much. And, the next time I watch them, it might be like, I might watch Superman again and be like, oh no, you know what? Actually, original Superman is number one again. To me, I get more emotional involvement in Man of Steel. We get to see him develop as a kid. We get to see him develop as a hero. That's one of the things, even as a kid, one of the things that I understood the reason for it, in trying to fit in like the biblical imagery, that you would have a stretch of time where, well, we don't know what happened to Clark in this stretch of time, from 18 to 30. We don't know. Like, he just disappeared for an amount of time, and then he came back and started his, for lack of a better term, ministry of being Superman. And, that's fine. And that's fine for that movie. But I'll take another line from the Bible. That was fine when I was a child. And now that I'm older, I put away childish things, and I want more explanation. I want more of that story. I want to know my characters, and I want to make that connection with them. I want to see a Lois that my Superman would fall in love with, that he would look at her and say, this is the humanity that I'm here to save. I wanted to, before we ended, I did want to pull these out, that I love. This is the part I love about both of these movies, is just the kind of ideal that this is trying to build up. And I love both of these speeches from Jor-El. And so I didn't want to, skip being able to read these or take a look at these. And in his speech in the Fortress of Solitude, he says, live as one of them, Kal-El. Discover where your strength and your power are needed. Always hold in your heart the pride of your special heritage. They can be a great people, Kal-El, if they wish to be. They only lack the light to show the way. For this reason, above all, their capacity for good, I have sent them you, my only son. And then I also wrote down the one from Man of Steel, and I love both of these. Jor-El says, you will give the people of Earth an ideal to strive towards. They will race behind you, they will stumble, they will fall, but in time they will join you in the sun, Kal. In time, you will help them accomplish wonders. And I think that's part of where I hit that difference is, I love the speech by Marlon Brando, Jor-El, but I will say I teared up in the theater when I listened to Russell Crowe deliver that speech. They will race behind you, they will stumble, they will fall, but in time they will join you in the sun. And it actually comes from a Superman comic, where it's a story in which Superman, his life is coming to an end. He's actually going to send himself into the sun, and that's going to be his final resting place. And so Jor-El's speech, and that's actually where Man of Steel took it from. His speech in that one is, your work is done. You have shown them the face of the man of tomorrow. You have given them an ideal to aspire to, embodied their highest aspirations. They will race and stumble and fall and crawl and curse, and finally, they will join you in the sun, Kal-El. In time, you will no longer be alone. And I think that like bringing that piece into Man of Steel, and just the way that speech is delivered and what that speech says, like it makes me, even now, it makes me emotional to think about that, the father speaking that to his son. And that's that emotional piece. I get that emotional piece every time I watch Man of Steel. I love Superman 1 and 2, but I don't get the emotional connection to those. So I think for that reason, and just because of some of the other things we've said about how I think there's more meat to Man of Steel, I got to go Man of Steel.
The speech by Russell Crowe, they used it for the trailer. And I can remember really distinctly when the trailers came out for Man of Steel before the movie came out, because the visual that you had in both trailers were the same, but in one you had that speech from Jor-El, and then the other one you have an admonishing speech from Jonathan Kent.
You have to decide what kind of man you want to grow up to be. Whoever that man is, good character or bad, he's going to change the world.
I can remember seeing those commercials, and it is the scene from the movie where they're looking at 9-year-old Clark Kent, and he's playing around in the yard, and he's got a cape on, and he, you see him stand up tall, put his chest out, put his hands on his hips in the iconic Superman pose. And I remember watching the first time, and I think my wife was next to me, and I said, even Superman wanted to be Superman when he was a boy. And that's the way it is, I think, for all young men. It's that ideal to strive for. We are always striving to be Superman. Okay, well, I think that does it for this episode, or in all likelihood, episodes. John, I really appreciate you coming out and being with us for all of these episodes. It's been great fun to have you, and so inspiring to hear your input on these. Great stuff. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah. Thank you guys for having me out. I can't wait to, obviously when this comes up in my feed, like I said, I jump to you guys first. I block all other podcasts. I'm like, nope, gotta find out what they're going to argue about this time. So I'll be looking forward to this one too.
Oh, thanks, man. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. And to all our listeners, please, if you haven't already, go check out 30 Something Movie Podcast. You can find them on Twitter at 30 Podcasts on Twitter. And is it the same on Facebook, John?
Yeah, it's pretty much, if you do 30 and podcast, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, there's probably something that's come out in the next 3 days that I'll sign up for. But yeah, 30 podcasts wherever.
Thank you all. Again, we're overwhelmed by the support that we've been getting for our podcast. We really love that you love what we're doing. And we're just going to keep on going as long as you're listening.
That's right. We'd love to have a 5-star review. 5-star review for 30 Something Podcast. We'll give you a big old fat super kiss.
We won't even give you amnesia.
And then and you know what? And once we give you that super kiss, you'll forget that you left a 5-star review. So then you can go leave another one.
All music, images, and movie clips are used for the purposes of commentary and education in conjunction with the Fair Use Agreement under the U.S. copyright law.
Come here and kiss your mama.